All right, ladies and gentlemen, so let's see this thing here. We want to go here temporarily. We want to pull up Wowhead, and we just want to sit on Wowhead for a bit because that'll give us the best, whatchamacalls it, whatever, the visual for the video on YouTube. If that makes any sense. All right, so I was having a conversation the other day with McConnell, and he basically gave me a video suggestion. And it dawned on me that one thing that I hadn't done recently was I hadn't done a video about a consolidated video of all of my findings so far with the PTR and Paladin gearing and the new runes and the landscape and just everything in general, right? All that information is basically spread out over like 6 hours, probably within at least like 4 or 5 videos, like that type of deal. So I wanted to actually make a video about consolidating all of that stuff, that information, if that makes any sense. All right, let's see here. Right, so to begin with, I actually made this video previously. Like I tried making it yesterday. It ended up being like an hour and like 20-minute video. But I forgot some stuff I wanted to mention, and there were other things that once I started talking about it, I was like, damn, I could actually figure that out. I could do better here. So that's kind of just why we're remaking this video. I also made a bunch of like little random doodles here to try to help me remember what the heck we're talking about. Okay. So where I want to start in all of this is actually right here. And let's move this here. Let's move that there. Let's just bring this right up to the front. Okay, cool. Where's my highlighter thing? Sweet. All right, so as a paladin in PvP, there are only 3 circumstances that you can find yourself in. Only 3 positions of play that you can possibly be in. Those positions, and feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't think I am here. The first place that you can be in PvP is that you're immobile and you're being forced to hardcast heals into yourself. The second place that you can be is pressing W in some direction. That's either towards the enemy or away from the enemy. That means you're running at them or running away, just in case you've never actually had W keybinded before. Some people ask me that, which is weird. And then the last place you can be that's significantly different than the other 2 is that you can be physically in melee. Being in melee is a hell of a lot different for Paladin because you start regenerating a lot of mana, a lot of HP, and of course you're delivering tons of damage. You can tell people to shut the hell up with rebuke and all that good stuff. Okay. The reason why this is important is if I start asking you questions like let's just begin with what I want to talk about. If I start asking you questions about like what is the value of a certain stat in your paladin, like critical strike or attack power or spell power or plus healing or HP, the answer is it really depends on which of these 3 states that you're actually in. So if I was to ask you, like, what is the value of melee critical strike, or attack power, like melee melee damage on your weapon, is melee damage on your weapon or any of its equivalent worth a damn while you are immobile and being forced to heal yourself? The answer is hell no. It's not doing anything for you whatsoever under that condition of PvP. What about when you're physically running away or at an enemy? Is any of that melee-based damage doing anything for you? The answer is hell no. Okay, what about a melee? Yes, the answer, of course, is yes right there. So you'll notice that things that increase our melee damage or our melee healing or our melee anything are only effective in melee. I know it sounds like rocket science, but just bear with me here. We'll add to the complexity. Okay, what about plus healing? To do the opposite end of the spectrum. Is plus healing useful while we're immobile and trying to heal ourselves? The answer is, of course, yes. Is it useful while we're mobile? In classic World of Warcraft, the answer would be no. A healing is not useful while mobile. And if we asked ourselves, what about plus healing while we're in melee, the answer, of course, would also, unless you're specifically using Edward the Odd, the answer would be no. So they would have kind of the opposite of each other in classic World of Warcraft. You know, melee damage is only useful in melee, and healing plus healing is only useful when you're immobile and you're healing yourself. But that's not true in Season of Discovery, right? In Season of Discovery, your plus healing is active while you're immobile. Sacred Shield has like a 58% spell power ratio behind it. The Flash of Light Hot on Sacred Shield has a spell power ratio behind it. Any crit heals you have that are giving you a 12-second hot have spell power ratio behind them. So while you're mobile, your plus healing is still in effect. And it can last so long because 12 seconds is such a long period of time. And you can actually do things like, stun the enemy and put a couple flashes of light into yourself, or repent them and heal yourself. That plus healing is even worth a damn in melee. So in Season of Discovery, plus healing is useful under all three conditions you could find yourself in as a paladin. All right, let's go through some other ones. Basically, we're trying to ascertain the value of stats on your paladin given the tactical situations that you find yourself in PvP. We're bringing tactics into play, or the not tactics, the tactical situation into play. Here with what stats are more valuable when and where. If this was a raid conditions and this was a target boss, you're almost always in melee versus a target dummy of a boss, which means melee stats are just they're basically just BIS, right? Because there's only one scenario you find yourself in under raid conditions, and that is in melee at all times. Unless it's like a really bad fight and you're forced to run around, in which case they'd probably want to bring some other class, or I don't even... Actually, usually just stay in melee even when you're mobile. It's kind of weird. Do I need to fix that? Is that my end? I'm going to go check that out and pause the video. Okay, we're back. Yeah, it was us. We got some faucet that tries to play monster every now and then. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, we were over here. Okay. Alright, so let's talk about spell damage and healing. Spell damage and healing follows a similar scenario to plus healing. She's actually her DPS component is actually how do I put this? She's actually kind of interesting because her DPS component of spell power. Let's get orange for spell power. Is useful both in melee and while you're mobile, mostly because Exorcism is used while you're closing from A to B, so any spell damage is useful there. Holy Shock is used while you're closing A to B, so spell damage is useful there. And of course, spell damage can be useful in melee. Depends on what spec of Paladin you're playing, of course. Some are using Seal of Righteousness, some are using Seal of Command instead, but either one of those have spell power ratio behind them. And of course, the plus healing aspect of any spell power is on display at all times, in all tactical situations on your paladin. The last one I want to talk about is HP. What is the value of HP? Where is it useful under what PvP circumstances? You might be tempted to say that HP, your HP level is useful while you're immobile and healing yourself. You would actually be wrong about that. The main reason you'd be wrong about that is because all HP is doing for you when you're standing still, but it also does the same thing for you while you're immobile and while you're in melee, is it protects you from enemy bursts, if that makes any sense. If the enemy can burst out 4,000 HP and you've got 5,000 HP bar, you're somewhat protected against an enemy incoming burst. But generally speaking, your HPS is more important for you while you're immobile and you're healing than the totality of your HP bar. The HP bar is literally just protecting you from being bursted out of existence, and then you really want your HPS to be higher than the incoming DPS, or it doesn't really matter how high your HP bar is. You're basically going to die. So there's stuff to talk about here, but really where HP is valuable, like going from 4,000 to 5,000 HP, for example, where it's really valuable is when you're mobile and when you're in melee. So I'm sure you guys have all noticed this by now, but you'll have the experience that closing the distance with your target as a paladin costs you a percentage of your HP bar. Then how long you get to beat on the enemy in melee before you're forced to stop and heal yourself is entirely dictated by how much damage you're taking versus how much HP you have left in the tank, right? So going from 4,000 to 500 HP can actually increase the amount of time you have to DPS on the target by a significant amount. It can go from 5 seconds of DPS before you're forced to stop and heal yourself to something like 10 seconds of DPS before you're forced to stop and heal yourself. HP bar also dictates how long you can run towards the enemy, like how much pressing W in one direction or another you can do before, like how much distance you can cover before you're forced to stop and heal yourself. And as just described, it will dictate like the amount of time you have to beat on the enemy while you are in melee. So HP is also an incredibly valuable stat. Blah, 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 blah. We definitely need to talk about this, but that basically covers the tactical situation of who's valuable where and why. Let's put some actual numbers behind that. Let me take a drink of water here. All right, let's put some numbers behind it. So if you look at up here, we have some weird numbers. Let me see if I can scroll up at all. Let me cough really fast here. All right, so we've got some weird numbers up here. You'll notice I have like 100 spell power and like 160 plus healing. I never did bother to calculate what Blizzard thinks the difference between spell power and plus healing is on gear. What I do know is that if an item says something like plus 100 spell power, its plus healing equivalent is going to be more than 50%, but like less than 70%. Like somewhere in that vicinity. So I've always wondered if it's like 2/3 or it was like a 60% increase in spell power. I just never got up off my butt to figure out what the actual ratio is. I do know that Blizzard's a little bit flexible with that ratio. It's not 100% consistent, but what I do know is that if spell power and healing are worth X, then plus healing on the same piece of gear, the same amount of item value dedicated to plus healing, will be like 1.6x at a minimum. So I have to compare the value of 100 spell power to like 100 plus healing, and then I have to ask myself, God damn it, let me go get the door. Oh my God, distractions. All right, let's continue this thing. Where the heck was I? Right, so we've covered the tactical level. So we've looked at the value of any given stat we can put on our paladin at the tactical level. And now we're trying to ascertain them at a more mathematical level, if that makes any sense. Okay, so the value of 100 spell power on your gear is going to give you the equivalent of about 22.5 HPS and 10 DPS. This is assuming something rather benign, such as you have Sacred Shield on yourself and you're doing between every 12 seconds, you're doing about 1.5 flashes of light. The reason why it's 1.5 is because you basically, every 12 seconds, you stop your paladin, you put 2 flashes of light into yourself to both heal you for quite a bit and to get the hots rolling. If the first flash of light crits, however, you don't bother with the second flash of light. You just press W and you let the crit hot do its damn thing. If the first flash of light does not crit heal you, then you go for a second flash of light, hoping it does crit heal you. But if it doesn't crit heal you, you just you're still fine. So it's like whatever. So on average, we're gonna say you do about 1.5 flashes of light every 12 seconds, which is not ideal because you're still being forced to be immobile every 12 seconds. But I've played with it. It's not the worst thing in the world. Anyways. The combination of that 50% chance to have a hot on you and the bonus crit healing and the hots and the Sacred Shield ratio and all that stuff, basically it means that 100 plus healing or 100 spell power is going to be 22.5 HPS on you, which is absolutely terrifying. And then, of course, 100 spell damage is worth about 10 DPS. It's important to note, however, that is entirely due to if you're taking the Purification rune, the one that makes your exorcism 7.5 seconds, that 10 DPS is almost entirely exorcism. It's like 8 DPS of that 10 DPS gain is exorcism. And the rest of it is just like, well, maybe you're using Seal of Righteousness, maybe you're not, maybe you're using Seal of Command, maybe you're not, and those do it. Maybe you get like a couple consecration ticks of damage here or not, and I just kind of was like, extra 2 DPS here or there. Drink of water. And naturally, if you had that same piece of gear rather than spell power as plus healing, it would be a whopping 36 HPS. Now, if I tried to ascertain how much attack power or critical strike or like melee crit do I need in order to compete with how much gains I'm getting from plus healing? The answer is I need about 78 strength. So in Season of Discovery, a good rule of thumb is that any physical-based damage, DPS increase, so traditionally it's like 14 attack power is 1 DPS. So 7 strength, therefore, is plus 1 white DPS on your Paladin. In Season of Discovery, basically double that or more. It might be a little bit less, it might be a little bit more, but generally speaking, you just double it. So, for example, in Season of Discovery, it's not 7 strength that's worth like 1 DPS. It's probably closer to like, 3.5 strength is worth 1 DPS in Season of Discovery. That's if you have Crusader Strike, that's if you have Divine Storm, and that's factoring in like, Seal of Martyrdom. That is not factoring in Seal Twisting. Seal Twisting will cause that number to go up even more. But of course your enemies have, block, dodge, and parry or not block usually, but like dodge and parry as well. So it's like whatever. So general rule of thumb, DPS effects on your Paladin from attack power or critical strike chance basically need to be doubled. All right, but still, you can see the math here is terrifyingly and horrifyingly in favor of the plus healing. I've said for a long time that I'm convinced that plus healing on your Paladin is basically a main stat in Season of Discovery. And both the tactical analysis and the mathematical analysis are not wrong on this. They're basically backing me up. So you need about 78 strength on your Paladin to gain a 22 DPS. You'll notice that that's only like 11 DPS, but we double it, and then we get about 22 DPS. So if a piece of gear says 100 spell power, just know that that's basically saying my bad. If a piece of gear says plus 100 healing on it, just know that its DPS equivalent would need to say like plus 80 strength in order to be comparable. If it says spell power on it, then it's a completely different story, because you'll notice that spell power still has 10 DPS assigned to it. Basically, everything is pointing to the fact that melee crit is not as good as you would think it would be, and strength and attack power are not as good as you would think they would be on your Paladin, but they're also something you don't want to ignore in the gearing. Okay, so now in a second, I'm going to switch over to more specifics about Paladin, but we're still in general 40,000 foot, looking at the forest instead of the trees type territory. So the last thing to mention in Season of Discovery is I looked at all the healers and basically the first thing I did on the PTR. Where the hell is this? I want this. The very first thing I did on the PTR was I looked at all the healers and their spell power ratios and all that stuff. And it's important for you to know how things have changed from the various phases that we've played versus phase 4 that we're in now, like all the changes Blizzard has done. What I'm trying to describe here is that the landscape of PvP has changed, and we need to talk about it because it's changed quite a bit. You'll notice that I haven't mentioned the 30% PvP damage reduction. It's 30% for spells, and it's like 20% for like melee attacks. I haven't even mentioned that. The reason why I haven't mentioned that is because it's actually the least important thing to talk about in this entire video. The TLDR on it is that every class in the game's standing HP their effective standing HP went up by about 44%. And mana wars are more prevalent than they ever were before because you're asking players to dig through considerably more HP on the enemy. Healing was nerfed by 30%. That's another weird thing about Sacred Shield is that shields were not subject to the minus 30% healing nerf, if that makes any sense. So Sacred Shields is doing her full 500 to 600 shield when you're properly geared every 6 seconds, and that's not nerfed by PvP. But the PvP nerf or the PvP damage reduction just makes bursting out of existence less prevalent. Prevailing. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Drink of water. But Blizzard has done a bunch of other things as well. So what Blizzard was doing previously in the previous phases was they were taking spells, like copy pasting spells directly out of like Wrath of the Lich King and TBC and Cataclysm, and then plugging them into Classic World of Warcraft. But they didn't adjust the spell power ratios or anything like that whatsoever. And so a few things. So, for example, Classic World of Warcraft has a very specific Jedi curve that it adheres to with its between spell power ratios and healing ratios and standing HP and yada yada yada. But generally speaking, you never see no spell damage ability in the game goes above 70% spell power ratio. And the healing spells at most have like 20% more spell power ratio. So, for example, the healing spells at best, they've got somewhere like a 80% spell power ratio. And I think Holy Light has an 80% spell power ratio. I could be wrong about that. And then like Lightning Bolt, for example, has a 70% spell power ratio. And that's literally how it is in Classic World of Warcraft. The healing spells have a tiny bit more a ratio behind them because plus healing gear has a relatively small improvement over spell damage and healing. Also, critical damage on spells usually does double damage in Classic WoW. It certainly does it in Season of Discovery, and you don't get that from plus healing. So it's very well balanced, so that DPS spells can never really outscale healing spells, but healing spells never really run away with the game and become a horrifying problem that nothing can really die. They're very, very close to each other. It'll be like if X class does 1,000 DPS, then its healing version of that class will have like 1,200 HPS. They are shockingly close to each other because the spell power ratios are shockingly close to each other and because of the gearing metrics in place. Blizzard has identified this and has brought all of the spells in Season of Discovery currently as they stand in line with Classic World of Warcraft. We even keep seeing blue posts where they continue to bring things in line with Classic WoW. I've looked at all the spell power ratios, and sure enough, they have been brought into line. And thank God for that. The other thing that they've done is they've looked at all the instant cast spells and how much damage they've actually been doing, and they brought them more in line with Classic World of Warcraft. In Classic WoW, instant cast spells were very rare, relatively short-ranged, and they rarely hit hard, and they were not spammable. And that made PvP very interesting and dynamic because it meant that if a caster really wanted to do damage, they really wanted to pump some DPS, they had to at least root their ass in place in order to do it. Which is a completely different meta than, I just run around and I spam my instant cast spells, lol W, and you blow up. So Blizzard has nerfed the damage on them considerably in conjunction with the PvP damage reduction. So, for example, Starfall or Star Surge or whatever the hell it is, if they hadn't changed anything, she'd probably be hitting for 2,000 damage. But as it stands, she hits you for 1,000 damage at most right now. Her spell power ratio is relatively weak. yada 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 yada. And they've done that to a fair bit extent with like Chimera Shot and a few other ones, and blah 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 blah. So all the instant cast abilities are still very prevalent in Classic World of Warcraft, but just know that they have lowered their damage considerably, and they've also gone and made the spell power ratios more in line with what they're supposed to be, which is not going above a 50% spell power ratio on an instant cast spell, unless specifically it has like a 6-second cooldown assigned to it. Okay, cool. Like the Star Surge, Starfall, or whatever the hell it is, used to have like 100% spell power ratio, which is completely out of line for an instant cast spell in Classic World of Warcraft. I think now she's sitting somewhere around like a 60% spell power ratio, but she is on a 6-second cooldown, which is perfectly fine. That is in line with Classic World of Warcraft. All right, so the other thing that they did, which I thought was interesting, is that this 300 HPS thing right here. So I went and I tested all of the healers, and I looked at like their instant cast healing spells. So in Classic WoW, hard casting heals is kind of a painful thing to do. It's not super easy to do, as you know, as a Paladin. Being highly mobile and healing is a lot easier defensively. So rather than looking at every class's like immobile HPS capability, I just looked at like their mobile HPS capability, and what I discovered is that Priest, Druid, Shaman, and Paladin, when they're pressing W somewhere, they all have 300 HPS worth of healing that they can do. That Sacred Shield plus that Flash of Light every 1.5. My bad. That was 1.5 Flash of Lights every 12 seconds. That generates on you as a Paladin about 300 HPS. I go look at what a Shaman can do. They have like an instant cast heal they can do every 6 seconds. That puts a hot on them that runs for 12 seconds. You factor that in with like Earth Shield or whatever the heck else they have going on for instant cast healing while they're mobile, and lo and behold, it's about 300 HPS. I go look at Priests, and I'm like, okay, well, how much damage does your Bubble Shield absorb? What about your Healing Hot? What about your Penance? Because, stopping and doing that, that might as well be a mobile heal because it happens so quickly. They have about 300 HPS. Same thing with Druid. Their mobile healing is about 300 HPS. So, Blizzard, there was another... Basically, there were two ways Blizzard could balance PvP in Classic WoW. One of them was to bring all the ratios in line with Classic World of Warcraft, and to make sure that the instant cast spells weren't horrifyingly out of line with Classic WoW. The other thing they could do, my bad, there's three ways. The other thing they could do is have PvP damage reduction. That would bring it all in line anyways. And the third and final option on the table for balancing PvP would be to identify roughly how much increase in DPS every class has had in Season of Discovery, and just give every class in the game basically HOTS, HPS HOTS that basically counter that increase in damage. Blizzard has literally looked at all three options and gone, why not do all of the above? So we have the PvP damage reduction, which helps against bursts. We have all the spell power ratios, and the instant cast spells have been brought more into line with Classic WoW, Jedi Curve, and Meta. And they seem to be adhering to a 300 HPS concept on just about any healer, mobile HPS for basically any healer in the game. Okay, cool. Let me drink a water here. Now, this brings up something very interesting. You'll notice I have the phrase EVE Online rules here. So, before I played WoW, I played an absolute ton of EVE Online. I spent many, many hours in the EVE fitting tool. And EVE Online plays some very interesting... Any game that's like hyper mobile HPS has EVE Online rules basically applied to it. And since Season of Discovery is this way, EVE Online rules get applied. Classic World of Warcraft does not have highly mobile HPS capability. So EVE Online rules never did apply to actually Classic WoW, but, I'm going to talk about it. So what EVE Online rules basically mean is this. let's say you do 400 DPS and the enemy has 300 HPS, right? You do 400 DPS, the enemy has 300 HPS. You're going to take, if this was like classic WoW, let me pull up a calculator. We have to assume our enemy has like 5,000 HP. I'll divide that by 100. It's literally going to take you 50 seconds of applying your 400 DPS to the target in order for you to kill that target in classic WoW because of EVE Online rules. Okay, I haven't explained what that phrase means yet, but we'll get there. Okay, now it's not quite that bad in classic WoW because there's a lot of front load in classic World of Warcraft. So, for example, when you jump on top of somebody with your Paladin, yes, you technically do 400 DPS as your Paladin potentially, but as his theoretical Paladin. But, you know, your Crusader Strike is off of cooldown, your auto attack is off of cooldown, your Judgment is off of cooldown, your Divine Storm is off of cooldown. Many of your highly damaging abilities are currently off cooldown, and just touching the enemy is going to cause all of that basically pre-charged DPS to flow out of you and flow into the enemy. So basically, when you jump on top of somebody, it's more accurate to assume that they basically lose 2,000 HP pretty much instantly. And so suddenly you're applying EVE Online rules to try to kill them through the remaining 3,000-ish HP of your opponent. Now your opponent does have pre-charge on their abilities as well, right? Like let me think about this. Who has that? Yeah, a priest might have another bubble shield that they can cast relatively quickly, so that's a bit of pre-charge. The shamans might have like another tidal wave or whatever the hell it is, Riptide or whatever. It's their instant cast healing spell they can pop immediately, so they might have a little bit of front-loaded healing. A priest might have a penance to go off. A druid might have a nature swiftness. Like, who knows, right? Oh, I don't want to talk about nature swiftness. That's more of a major cooldown type deal. That's a completely different meta. The other way, of course, to balance PvP is with a major cooldown meta. You see that a lot in retail, but it's not the meta you want in Classic WoW. And Blizzard did not put it in Classic WoW, thank God. But it's important to realize that EVE Online meta also applies a bit of front-loaded burst to it. But it definitely is in favor of the DPS classes than it is in favor of the HPS classes. So now we're being forced to chew through 3,000 HP at 100 DPS, effective DPS. We call that effective DPS in EVE Online versus the target. So the target will die if I'm allowed to apply my 400 raw DPS to the target for 30 seconds after the initial clash with them and the front-loaded burst damage. Cool. All right. Now let's talk about the value of increasing your DPS by a relatively tiny amount of like 50. So now I have to chew between 3,000 DPS, but now I have 150. I literally have a 50% increase in my effective DPS. My total DPS went from 400 to 450. But my effective DPS, like how much DPS is actually getting through to the target and piercing, overcoming, and sticking to the target's HP bar, overcoming their HPS, has gone from 100 to 150, a literal 50% increase in my effective DPS. And we hit that button. You can see now rather than 30 seconds to kill this target, I only need 20 seconds to kill that target. Now that's what I mean by EVE Online rules apply. So when we look at the raw stat values on our Paladin, it is insanely clear very quickly that plus healing or spell power with plus healing on it are your best stats for Paladin. And it's making it very clear that you should not touch critical strike, melee crit chance, or attack power whatsoever for your PvP Paladin. And that's pretty definitive, even when we look at the tactical level, right? At the tactical level, the plus healing is in effect at all times. The spell damage is in effect both in melee and while you're mobile. Whereas the attack power is only at play specifically in melee. all of that checks out and makes perfect sense, and then you remember that you live in an EVE Online rules type environment. And EVE Online rules is very, very clear that small increases in DPS, once you have enough DPS that you're overcoming your enemy's HPS, are significantly higher in value than you think they would be, right? So we have to factor in EVE Online rules. Now, let's say you're a Paladin and you've only got 350 DPS and your enemies have 300 HPS, right? Meaning you're going to take something stupid like over a minute to kill them. Just know that, which you're never going to get a minute of DPS time on them ever. That's when you enter a mana war state, right? You're not going to be killing them because you're overcoming their HPS and then killing them. You're going to be killing them because you're wearing on their mana bar by forcing them to sustain this HPS over time, which also is EVE Online rules. Believe it or not, EVE Online has its own version of a mana bar in your capacitor. So an EVE Online is set up so that you either try to kill the enemy quicker than them running out of capacitor and dying, or you try to kill them by wearing on their capacitor until they run out of mana and they basically die. So EVE Online rules do apply here. Okay, all right. So now we can get into Paladin gearings and specifics and talents and so forth and so on. It's just important to realize that the landscape has changed. EVE Online rules is 100% a thing that we need to keep an eye on. Every healer class in the game seems to have about 300 HPS built into their toolkit. So suddenly we need to start using terms like your effective HPS and kill times and front load and yada, yada, yada. The last thing to mention before I forget about it is the value of HPS as it pertains to DPS, specifically for Paladin. This should be a no-brainer, but I'll cover it anyways. So remember when I said that how much HP you have will dictate how long you can press W, and more importantly, how much time you can DPS into a target before you're forced to stop and heal yourself. Your standing HP will do that. Well, your HPS is in a constant state of increasing your standing HP. So the more HPS you have means that the longer you get to sit in melee on top of someone and deliver your DPS into them, right? DPS is a combination of both the D, that's the damage, and the S, that's the seconds of time you get to put into the target. So know that HPS, it doesn't increase your damage, but it definitely increases how much time you get to put your DPS into the target before you're forced to break off and heal yourself from actually sitting on top of them and DPSing. So, as we stated before, if we went from 400 DPS to 450 DPS, suddenly we don't need 30 seconds of time on target. We only need 20 seconds of time on target to grind this guy into pulp. HPS is still incredibly valuable because that might be exactly what the doctor ordered for us to sit on top of them for 20 seconds and actually kill the target. Some people might think, well, I only have 10 seconds of DPS, so I need to do even more damage to try to get it down to 10 seconds of DPS. That's usually mathematically, that is a bad gearing option. You're usually better off increasing your HPS at a certain point. So very quickly, we're going to find in Season of Discovery that there's a certain amount of DPS that we want to hit as a breakpoint. And once we hit that DPS as a breakpoint, we want to put all of the remaining stats that we have on our Paladin effectively into HPS. You could also think of it in reverse, where we want enough HPS to be able to sit on our target for a very specific amount of time. And then once we achieve that amount of HPS, we just want as much DPS as we can get our hands on. All roads lead to Rome here, though. So, despite the fact that I spent all this time completely shitting on melee DPS and its value, know that EVE Online rules are back. It brings melee DPS back on the menu, boys. All right, cool. So let's go over here and let's talk about some things. Do I want to talk about the gearing first, or do I want to talk about the different Paladin specs and their playstyles? That is the question. All right, so now we're pulling away from like the 40,000 foot view of Paladin, and we're moving on into Paladin specifics. So we're going to be talking about runes, we're going to be talking about classes, specs, and all that stuff. All right. Let's see here. How long is this video so far? 40 minutes? Great. All right, so since McConnell wanted this video, let's start with Deep Ret Paladin. I'm going to start with Holy and then Deep Ret Paladin because they're basically both on the opposite ends of the spectrum. The first thing to note in SoD PvP is that there is no good Paladin PvP spec that does not either have Eye for an Eye or Reckoning. And the reason for this is very simple when you look at things at the tactical level. Right, so if you don't have Eye for an Eye or Reckoning, and you're basically forced to stop and Eye for an Eye and Reckoning are absolutely amazing because they are there for you pretty much at all times in your PvP adventures tactically, right? So for example, when you're mobile as a Paladin, you're usually putting a lot of pressure on your enemy, and you're drastically reducing incoming enemy DPS. The reason for that is because they either stand there and let you close the distance to them, and they stand there and they keep DPSing on you at full force for the 3 seconds it takes you to close the distance to be physically on top of them, or they start moving, and once they start moving, their DPS kind of goes to shit, right? However, they're still usually peppering you with instant cast spells and like instant shot abilities and all that stuff. But the totality of their DPS becomes absolutely terrible, which is also why when you have this 300 HPS, mobile HPS, and you're buffing it with plus healing, it becomes really, really scary for the enemy because they can't force you to stop and heal typically without rooting themselves into place to do some real damage, which is really good game balance for Paladin because in order to get those hots rolling, we have to be the ones to stop and heal ourselves. So I just think the game balance here is really fascinating. But I'm going off the rails. I'm sidetracking myself here. Stay focused. Eye for an Eye is amazing because it's here for you under all circumstances. Reckoning is amazing because it's there for you under all circumstances. If you're geared as a plus healing Paladin, like I plan to go into combat with a heavy amount of plus healing, and then to play specifically heal Reckoning. That's a Paladin. It's literally like 10 to 9 talent points in the prot tree. I can gear it up here really fast. This is what I plan to use in combat. Something like this. Boom, boom, boom. I'll just put my points wherever I want. I think it's 4 points here. I want 3 points in improved concentration. I want 2 points in hammer. I want 5 in reckoning. And then I should have exactly 17 points left over to plug into... Vindication, sure. Do I want the extra? I like taking this Pursuit of Justice, believe it or not, these days. Boom. And that's the build. So you can see I've got 5 points in Reckoning. I've got 4 points in Spiritual Focus. The plan is to basically live an improved concentration aura. If I want to, I could strip 1 point away from Reckoning and put it into Spiritual Focus. And the next thing that allows me to go a Resistance aura and still have healing capability. But I'm going to go this route. But it's a Paladin that can both heal in combat, and it has Reckoning, and it has Eye for an Eye. And when I'm forced to stop and heal myself as a Paladin, I still have Eye for an Eye, and I still have Reckoning that are doing their damn job. They're charging up some burst damage. They're causing chip damage on the enemy. Again, with the EVE Online rules and effects, burst damage is really, really valuable. Chip damage is also really, really valuable. The enemy cannot really stop their good RNG burst. A good RNG burst for an enemy involves critical strikes, right? They fling 4 spells at you, and if 3 of those have crit you, it usually forces you as the Paladin to not even you're not even waiting to see if the 4th spell crits you or not. You're basically just bubbling, right? You're like, okay, fine, take my bubble. Okay, fine, take my divine steed as I run away from you. Okay, fine, take my malleable protector. Take my blessing of protection. Take my healing potion, whipperroot tuber. Take some major defensive CD out of me because RNG came through for you. They can't really stop in the middle of that burst when the burst is going well, right? Like say a mage is bursting on you, or a boomkin is bursting on you, and everything is coming up crit for them, right? They're going crit, crit, crit. They can't really stop that in the middle of that burst and heal themselves from all the damage that they've been taking while bursting on you. Like that's eye for an eye. That's what eye for an eye is doing. So you'll survive the burst, and then you'll turn and you'll look at that shaman or that whatever class over there, and they're just missing like 30% of their HP, or even 50% of their HP, depending upon how they're geared. It's just gone, and it's gone because they couldn't stop and heal themselves, and that's super valuable to you as a paladin. Reckoning should be a no-brainer as to its value to you, especially with EVE Online rules in play. It's a completely different story if you're jumping on top of the enemy and removing, 2,000 HP from them versus a wreck bomb, which is going to remove 70% of their HP bar. And then you have questions about what is your raw DPS versus their HPS look like. So moral of the story, and of course, Reckoning is there for you it's there for you while you're, Eye for an Eye and Reckoning are there for you while you're in melee, while you're mobile, and while you're healing. With the new Aegis rune and its mechanics with Seal of Martyrdom. So Seal of Martyrdom is still proccing the Aegis rune, to my knowledge. Basically, and it's doing it through Sacred Shield, which is kind of really nice. Basically, we can look at it here really fast. Aegis rune should be on the chest. Yeah, the new Aegis rune. So it says, in addition, your Reckoning talent gives a 10% chance per talent point to trigger from any melee or ranged attack against you. It's not ranged attack, it's more like damage. They've reworded it, so I might have to go test it again to see if it still works this way. But the way it was working is if I hit you and I'm using Seal of Martyrdom, and the Seal of Martyrdom damage that I take from judging and auto-attacking the target has a 10% chance to give me a Reckoning charge, which is absolutely amazing. And if it's still in effect in the game and they don't change that, and it even works through Sacred Shield. If Blizzard doesn't change that, and I don't think they should, because it's actually kind of fascinating and amazing. What makes Paladin so amazing as a class is, on the surface, she's dirt simple, but then things under the hood are very complicated, and what gear to wear on her and why become extremely complicated. That's what makes her a very interesting class. On the surface, very simple, but Jesus Christ, are her mechanics below the surface, like what the hell, and you can really squeeze value out of it. And the fact that Seal of Martyrdom is normalized, which means she does more damage with a faster weapon. The fact that she has this weird interaction with when she crits, she procs Art of War rune is a really interesting interaction. And then here's a new really interesting interaction with Seal of Martyrdom. So we're really, really happy about that. Right, so super there for you, right? Always there for you. And that's why there isn't really a viable PvP spec in Season of Discovery that isn't using Reckoning or Eye for an Eye, because we are in EVE Online rules territory, and those are incredibly powerful, valuable abilities, and they're there for you under any tactical circumstance you find yourself in, and they're basically worth their weight in gold. Okay, cool. So, when we talk about Deep Holy Paladin, know that we're talking about Shock Eye specifically. So that's 31 points in the Prot tree, and then you put at least 17 points in the Retribution tree, and then you have like 3 points left over that you put in like the Redoubt talent for why the hell not purposes. Could also put it in Conviction. I don't want that. What is this? Critical Strike with melee weapons. Yeah, we don't want that. If this said melee and spells, I'd consider putting extra points in Conviction, but it doesn't, so it is what it is. Now, the weird thing about the Holy Shock Paladin is that you would think, okay, that the value of spell power on your Holy Shock Paladin goes up significantly more than it is up on any other Paladin, which is true technically. For example, when you do the math on Holy Shock, she's 100 spell power gain on your Holy Shock Paladin is worth another 8 to 10 DPS worth of gain from Holy Shock alone. So if we go over here to the value of whatever stat on your Paladin is worth X, you basically have to double this, or even 2.5 times this for a Holy Shock Paladin. Why is this? Because they're definitely using Seal of Righteousness. Seal of Righteousness has a ton of spell power behind it, which means they're also definitely using Judgment of Righteousness, and Judgment of Righteousness has a whopping 50% spell power ratio behind it. You are in the Ret tree, so she's on an 8-second cooldown, which is absolutely amazing. Holy Shock has the equivalent of like a 60% spell power ratio behind it because of the way her 50% damage increase was coded. Normally it's 40%, but now it's 60% because of the 50% damage increase. That is how the coding works on her. And of course, you still have you're 100% going to be using Purifying Power on the build. It's only the Reckoning Paladins that aren't going to be using Purifying Power. So this math here applies to every single Paladin except Reckoning Paladins. Reckoning Paladins want to use the Instant Hammer of Wrath runes, hopefully for obvious reasons. But every other Paladin and their dog are probably using Purifying Power, so this math checks out for them. So Holy Shock, Purifying Power, Deep Ret Paladins, Purifying Power, Reckoning, that's a Reckoning Paladin, so they don't want to use that, blah, 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 blah. So the value of plus healing or spell power on your Holy Shock Paladin, in theory, look at me, in theory, goes up. Then you look at the tactical situation and discover that you're probably wrong. And that's what these numbers over here are that have been just sitting over here in the background. The reason for this is because Holy Shock Paladin has a ton of spell power, or my bad, not spell power, spell damage, just built into her toolkit. When you judge Crusader Strike, my bad, when you do Judgment of Crusader, that's like plus 200 spell damage, or spell power on the target. Spell damage, yeah, spell damage on the target, Holy specifically. You have Shock and Awe, which is going to give you between 200 to 300 spell power, depending upon your gear. And you're just basically swimming in an ocean of spell damage, but you're not swimming in an ocean of plus healing. And what this means is, and what these two different numbers are up here specifically, is we're examining what happens to a Holy Shock Paladin if I gear more spell damage and healing, or if I gear more plus healing. So this 700/225 Paladin is a Holy Shock Paladin that decided that they don't want any plus healing gear. All they want is spell damage gear. Well, when you do that, you're going to go up about 200-ish spell power, and you're only going to be sitting at about 275 plus healing. Why are we at 275 plus healing? How did that happen? Well, because your Paladin-specific Librams have plus 25 healing on them, and then you have plus 25 healing to your as a glove enchant, I do believe. But basically, standing. What's going on? Oh, never mind. Right. So you can see that, yeah, your spell damage is really, really high, but your plus healing is actually shockingly low. And what's going on out there? Nothing? Oh, my wife's doing the dishes or something. Okay, weird. I thought the dogs were into something. What am I trying to say here? You're going to find a hell of a lot more DPS and subsequently a hell of a lot more success as a Holy Shock Paladin. What? What? I don't give a fuck. Shut up. God damn it. Why does my wife do that? I informed her I'm making a video. It's painfully obvious. It means leave me alone. I'm like, what the hell do you want? She's like, the dog's peed here. I'm like, I love you. And she doesn't believe me. Holy crap. For the record, women do that intentionally, but unconsciously intentionally. Basically, they're asking you to prove that you care more about them than whatever the thing is you're currently very passionate about. Feel free to tell them you love them or tell them to shut the hell up. Both of them work. As long as you're getting agitated and paying attention to them, they're happy. I've been married 14 years, people. I think I know a thing or two about this by now. All right, moving on here. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that you're going to find a hell of a lot more DPS and subsequently a hell of a lot more success as a Deep Holy Paladin by just being able to sit on top of the target and put Judgments of Righteousness and put Seal of Righteousness as damage into them for an extended period of time. Right? You're going to do way more DPS if you can manage that feat consistently and far more often and far longer, if that makes any sense. What this means is that you're honestly better off gearing plus healing on a Holy Shock Paladin than going spell power. Even though spell power on paper, it's doing way more for you. At the tactical level, with tactical considerations, you're going to find way more DPS and way more durability gearing plus healing. So if you're doing a Holy Shock Paladin, this is basically my backup build in my dual spec Paladin. So like I said, I plan on gearing heavy plus healing oriented. I plan on gearing very durable, and I plan on my main spec being Heal Reckoning. But my backup dual spec is going to be a Holy Shock build, and I won't even have to change my gear out. I'll have to change my runes out, and that's about it. And the plus healing gear flows over into the Holy Shock build extremely well. So know that on paper, plus spell damage and healing is really good for Holy Shock Paladin, and it is. It begins to fall apart when you look at it tactically. Tactically, you should be wearing plus healing on that Paladin. Because SOR, JOR are going to do way more for you DPS-wise than any spell power gains because you're going to be constantly forced to stop and heal yourself, and it's really bad. We already talked about how the HPS increases your time on target. It is technically a DPS increase. You're throwing away a lot of DPS, blah, 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 blah. All right, now other end of the spectrum, let's talk about Deep Ret Paladin. Oh, also my wife has like... what is it? Like a conference or something she has to do in like 30 minutes. And I'm like, fine, I'll just crank out this video really fast so you can do your damn conference and I can take the dogs outside. Why is she pestering me? I don't know. Whatever. Let's talk about Deep Ret. Okay, so Deep Ret is fascinating because she is, in Season of Discovery, she is a jack of all trades, master of none, and she's kind of this thing that can be played in 4 different ways, but she's kind of best played in one of 2 different ways, and she's the one paladin where EVE Online rules really begin to apply, and you really have to pay attention to it, okay? So, for example, the 2 different ways to play her really depend on if you plan to heal in combat or if you don't plan to heal in combat. If you're not planning on healing in combat, that probably means you're using a control ret paladin. So you put 31 points into the retribution tree, and then you put the remaining points into the protection tree. What that means is you end up getting improved Hammer of Justice. Your Hammer of Justice is on a 35-second cooldown. You have Repent. You might even also be going with like Goblin Mortar and Tidal Charm and just being a complete dick about it. But generally speaking, you want to use like a slow two-handed weapon. There's another version of this that does have heal in combat, believe it or not, and we'll talk about that. But the general principle is that you're using a slow two-handed weapon, and when you jump on top of somebody, you're Crusader Striking them and you're Divine Storming them. You're getting those abilities on cooldown. You're exorcisming them, and really you're trying to kill them through a combo. If I recall correctly, Malleable Protection is a spell you definitely want to take. Sheath of Light is kind of useless to you now. It's pretty useless to just about every paladin, believe it or not. The one paladin that wants to take Sheath of Light is happy to take Infusion of Light instead. Every paladin and their dog want to take Malleable Protector for PvP. What does it do for you? Well, it doesn't share a cooldown with bubble, number one. It reduces the cooldown of the ability to 3 seconds. And other than that, it does what it says on the tin. Gives you, doesn't affect any of your damage, doesn't slow down your auto attack, but it causes you to take 50% reduced damage for 12 seconds, which is absolutely terrifying and is enough for you to go all in on. So if you recall correctly, when we talked about the tactical layer of things, EVE Online rules are dictating that you do as much burst damage as you can to the enemy as is physically possible, and then from there, life just becomes a game of math, where it's all about how much effective DPS you can put on the target for as long as possible. Like how much DPS, how much time do I have to DPS on this guy before I either die or I'm forced to stop and heal myself? Versus how much DPS do I need? You know, EVE Online rules are in full effect, right? Full effect, full effect, full effect, and nothing is better on your deep rep Paladin than using bubble offensively, and or using malleable protector offensively to give you as much time to DPS that target down as is physically possible. You also have repent to play with. Never, ever, 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 unless you know better than I do, never use repent to catch a target in PvP. It is a terrible use of repent. The only time you ever use repent to catch a target in PvP is if you also need to heal yourself. So you'll repent the target. You'll put like one flash of light into yourself. You're not even going to use flash of light anymore. You're going to be using, where's the back rune? Because Righteous Vengeance is useless to you. Shield of Righteousness is useless to you. And Holy Shock is you can't even use it. You're going to be using the Divine Light rune. Divine Light is actually really, really good for Paladins because it lets us top off our healing without needing to wear a bunch of plus healing gear, even though plus healing gear is highly advised. So in this situation, you would repent the target, you'd put one Divine Light worth of healing into yourself, and you'd use the remaining, like, you know, what is that, 3.5 seconds to run over, of repent to run over to the target, so you close the distance. Your auto attack is ready at that point, and you start giving them the business. That's the only acceptable offensive use of repent to really catch a target, outside of some very tactical nuances of, like, it's the mage's third blink, and I would like to not be sheep, and I have repent available. So, yeah. Generally speaking, you want to catch your target with a grenade. So you throw a grenade, you stun the target for 3 seconds, you run over to them, you start giving them the business. You pop Malleable Protector or you pop a bubble. It really depends on what you have available, and it depends on what you're being hit with, right? If they've, like, CC'd you in an ice cube immediately, feel free to pop bubble. You know, just pop bubble and continue DPSing on them. You now have Rebuke. You should be 100% taking Rebuke. Rebuke is better on a deep rep Paladin. She's actually BIS on pretty much every Paladin build, but she's super, super good, specifically on a deep rep Paladin. You take Rebuke. That's going to force your enemy to not cast hard cast healing spells. Rebuke actually shuts down healing and shuts down offensive spell casts on your enemy for a whopping, like, 7 seconds. Like, how is it doing that? Well, if they're casting a spell for, like, 2 seconds and you tell them to shut the hell up for 3 seconds and then they have to cast the spell again for another 2 seconds, they haven't been casting a spell for, like, 7 seconds. Lord knows as Paladins, we understand this concept in the reverse, right? I'm almost done casting a Holy Light. I get grenaded. I'm stunned for 3 seconds. It's going to be, I have to sit this 3-second stun and then another 2.5 seconds before any big boy heals are coming my way. So it's actually really, really good. She ends up being front-loaded, so you get 2 of them within the first, 15 seconds of being on top of somebody. Absolutely beautiful spell and ability. It doesn't conflict with Exorcism anymore. Definitely take it. But anyways, you want to catch them with grenade. This is very important. And then you don't want to stun them very quickly at all. You need 16 seconds between one stun to another stun before the DR wears off. So typically what you're trying to do is you catch them with the stun, and then you just sit on them for at least 10 seconds, using malleable protection or using your bubble, like, DPSing into them. And then you repent them for 6 seconds, and you use that 6 seconds to, put one Divine Light into yourself, reset the cooldown of your auto attack, let Crusader Strike come off a cooldown, let Exorcism come off a cooldown, let Divine Storm come off a cooldown, and then when those 6 seconds are up, then you Hodge Stun them, and the Hodge Stun they will eat for the grand total of like 6 seconds. So, to be clear, you have stunned them for 3 seconds. You have sat on top of them for at least 10 seconds while in a bubbled or malleable protected state. Then you repented them for 6 seconds. And then after that, you can Hodge Stun them for 6 seconds. And their stuff is going to die. Stuff is going to get absolutely hacked to effing pieces. Now, that's one way to do it. That's like the all-in version of how to do it. The other way of how to do it, and these aren't mutually exclusive, right, is with the heal, with the classic ret. So classic ret is like 31 points into the ret tree, and then you put enough points into the holy tree to at least get consecration, typically. You can put more points in there, like you can put 3 points in healing light. 3 points in healing light is worth like plus 300 HPS, believe it or not. Or my bad, not 300 HPS. It's like worth like each point in this damn a talent tree is worth like plus 100 healing, which is super, super good. We've already talked about that. So it's highly advised that of your 20 remaining points, you put you could go Divine Intellect or Divine Strength. It really doesn't matter. But highly advised that you at least put, 14 points into the Holy Tree. You've only got 6 left, or whatever the heck it is. You really want the increased time on Freedom. I only got 6 points to spend here, don't I? Ooh, now that's a good question. I guess I would strip 1 point out of Healing Light, and yeah, so you can see we got our extra 20. So you'd put 31 points into the Retribution Tree, you'd put 13 points into the Holy Tree, or you wouldn't even get Consecration. You would just, like, do this. Hard to say. And then you'd go deep enough into the Prot Tree just to get your Blessing of Freedom, to not have any Blessing of Freedom issues. You probably don't need the 3% hit for PvP. You wish you could get Toughness, but it's fine. That's not bad. But the idea is that you're a deep rep Paladin that can heal themselves. And when you're a deep rep Paladin that can also heal themselves in combat, suddenly you can your win conditions look a little bit different. Okay, so any Paladin that can effectively heal themselves while in combat, okay, suddenly the value of plus healing gear on you goes up significantly, right? The value of Sacred Shield goes up significantly, obviously. The value of durability-based trinkets, such as the ones with stamina and fire resist on them, go up significantly. Because otherwise it's like, oh, I need to heal myself. Let me Hodge Stun you. My bad. Let me Tidal Charm you while I heal myself. Let me Goblin Mortar Stun you while I heal myself. That's not really what you're up to. You're just like, let me stop and heal myself. I just want the increase in durability. But more importantly, another win condition opens up for you, specifically centered around your second Hodge Stun. Okay? Now, Reckoning Paladins don't need to live to their second Hodge Stun. Okay, that's not true. Let me think about that. Right, so if you're a Paladin that can heal in combat, okay, and you've decided to go the plus healing gear route, know that your best kill, your best kill opportunity is when the enemy does not have, when their enemy's PvP trinket is on cooldown, and you can get them in like a 6-second Hodge Stun. That is by far your best kill opportunity. It's no different for like a deep rep Paladin. So a deep rep Paladin that can heal in combat will do everything that a normal rep Paladin will do, but they're not really stressing it to use a bubble or malleable protector offensively all that much. What they're really doing is they're just trying to survive long. They're trying to get your PvP trinket out, and they're trying to survive the minute or so until their grenade is off a cooldown again, until their Hodge Stun is off a cooldown again, and then they can like give you the business inside of a 7.5 second stun combo. That's what that deep ret paladin is really looking for. This version of a deep ret paladin, because they're not super stressed out and they're more, they have more time on target capability. Careful with Tomato. Is he in the bathroom? What's? Yeah, he's just hiding in there. That's funny. I got one dog whining at the bathroom door of another for some reason, which means that the other dog is using the bathroom door as like a wall to stop the other dog from pestering him. So he's like, I want in there to like play with you, and their dog's like, no. It's pretty funny. I was wondering what was going on over there. Right. So time on target is a thing that you can do. So you can win fights by just sitting on the enemy for an extended period of time, just beating the crap out of them, or that's kind of like your backup plan. But then your backup plan is like, oh, I have Hodge stun and grenade available. Hey, let me just stun you for 7.5 seconds and see if you survive this nonsense. The other really good thing about this particular PvP build is that she's a bit more mana friendly. Specifically because you don't really need to take Purifying Power. Purifying Power is a really good rune, but Jesus Christ, does she wear on your mana bar without... she wears on your mana bar pretty hard without Art of War rune, if that makes any sense. But if you take the Wrath rune instead, right... and you look to kill your enemy not so much by doing a time on target EVE Online rules type deal, by sitting on your enemy for a long period of time and not letting them hard cast heals, which is what we just described. But instead, you're looking to kill them more under like bursting conditions, in like a 7.5 second stun wombo combo. At that point, you really don't need Purifying Power anymore. And instead of taking Purifying Power, you take the Wrath rune. It's the wrist runes. You take Improved Hammer of Wrath rune. Suddenly, you have a lot less mana issues on your Paladin. Believe it or not. And it pairs super, super well with trying to kill your opponent quite quickly. Damn, what am I trying to say here? Basically, you're performing a wreck bomb kill sequence, but in slow motion. It's really hard to describe. So, for example, you're going to find yourself in a situation when you can 7.5 second stun them, where they've taken like 30% life damage already just because of you beating on them pretty much constantly. Yes, your effective DPS is kind of low because you're in plus healing gear, but they can't really get you off of them. You just keep beating on them. You keep regenerating your mana. You keep beating on them. So they have some chip damage associated. Their HP bar is a little bit worn down. The next thing you know, you stun them for 7.5 seconds, and you only have to drop them to 20% life, and they're basically just going to explode, right? Because you took this rune instead of the other one. You can't really get a second exorcism very well. Like, Purifying Power is nice in the 7.5 seconds because you can exorcism them, and then you can initiate the 7.5 second stun, and you'll have another exorcism for them before that 7.5 second stun ends. But you could have just as easily casted like a 1 second Hammer of Wrath even without the ability. And if you, like, you know, even without a Purifying Power, and of course, if you took the Improved Hammer of Wrath rune, you could cast like 3 Hammers of Wrath into the enemy in that same space of time. So, enemy dies. So, I'm a huge fan of the Improved Hammer of Wrath rune, believe it or not, just because there's a lot of issues. I also love Purifying Power. When you know how to use her offensively and defensively, especially when you use her to cause spell pushback, Purifying Power is absolutely amazing. But dear fucking God, do I love Hammer of Wrath as well. Just because it's another 20% of the enemy's HP bar I just don't have to deal with. She can throw like 2 hammers in like 0.5 seconds, which is disgusting. You can do it while mobile, which is also disgusting. More importantly, she makes gearing your Paladin much more interesting and smooth because there's a lot less wear and tear on your mana bar, especially in these longer, more endurance-based fights where you're basically getting their PvP trinket and then just waiting for Hodge Stun to be available again so you can go all in on the Hodge Stun. Now, One important thing to note about this more time on target oriented paladin is that a really fast one-handed weapon like Typhoon is worth its weight in gold. So you'll jump on top of the enemy with a slow two-hander and do Crusader Strikes and Divine Storms and all that stuff. But once you're done with all your front load damage with that slow two-handed weapon, so maybe you've done two Divine Storms and 3 Crusader Strikes and an exorcism into the target or whatever. If you're still physically on top of the target after that, swap to a really fast two-handed weapon. The reason why you want to do this is twofold. Number one, it does a terrifying amount of raw DPS. Front load be damned. Even if you're losing damage on your Crusader Strike, even if you're losing damage on your Divine Storm, the sheer amount of raw DPS flowing out of you and into the target makes up for it. But more importantly, you're regenerating an absolute shit ton of mana back because you basically judge wisdom on the target, hopefully. And just having the faster two-handed weapon is better. If you saw my fight versus the Shaman over there, the first fight I had with the Shaman, I lost because I was using a two-hander. And the second fight, it was a draw, and I might have been able to squeak out a victory, maybe, kind of, but probably not. But it was definitely a very long, drawn-out fight, but I definitely did much better. But that's when I was using a fast one-handed weapon to really regenerate mana. But you can have the best of both worlds if you're using a weapon like Typhoon, basically. You can both have a shit ton of damage flowing out of you and into the enemy. Holy crap, that was scary. I'm waving my arms around as I talk. A ton of damage flowing out of you and into the enemy, while at the same time just bathing in the glorious mana regeneration or HP regeneration if you've judged light on the target, right? Good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. That amount of mana regeneration will probably let you support Purifying Power, right? So if you are Purifying Power and you're in melee, highly advised that you switch to a fast two-handed weapon after you've delivered the front-loaded attacks, because you cannot support Purifying Power in these longer fights without that increased mana regeneration. If you've gone Hammer of Wrath instead, you could play it both ways, but you're going to find a use for all that mana anyways, so you might as well do it. It might be a bit of a long fight. How do I put this? If you're the mana variant, if you're the healing variant of the Paladin, you don't have improved Hammer of Justice, so at best you're waiting 50 seconds for your next Hammer of Justice. That's a long fucking time. You're gonna want another 75% mana bar that you're gonna regenerate from the fast two-handed weapon. So experiment with weapon swapping. The other nice thing about being a deep rep Paladin is that if you need to heal yourself, you don't have any reckoning charges or anything to worry about. You do have eye for an eye in play, so it's very easy for you if you're forced to stop and heal yourself to swap to a one-handed healing weapon and a shield healing shield, and to get your to get some really good self-healing in. But you're also a repent Paladin, so at any point in time you can just kind of tell them to shut the hell up, and while you heal to full. So whatever. Deep rep Paladin is in a really good spot. You just have to be really smart about how you play it. And you need to understand that every deep rep Paladin wants 3 different weapons. You want a super fast two-handed weapon. Actually, you want more than that. You want a slow one-handed weapon. You want a really fast two-handed weapon. You want a really slow two-handed weapon. And then lastly, you want a healing one-hander and a healing shield. All right, well, my wife has to do her conference thing here in a second, so I'll wrap this up. I'll also start talking a bit quieter. The last thing to talk about, of course, is the Reckoning Paladins. There's not really a lot to talk about with the Reckoning Paladins here, because they're both playing EVE Online rules, but at the same time, they have Reckoning to play with, so rather than having to chew through 3,000 HP worth of enemy health bar while trying to overcome 300 enemy HPS, they're only gonna have to chew through 1,500 HPS bar, and they only have to drop it down to 1,000 HP before Hammer of Wrath just fixes the problem super fast. This is also why I'm a huge fan of Hammer of Wrath, because every Reckoning, it just makes Reckoning Paladin absolutely amazing. If you have Eye for an Eye, it just makes it even worse because they get the front-loaded chip damage, then they get the back-loaded deletion from Hammer of Wrath. Just absolutely disgusting. Deep Rep Paladins, they want to use... whatchamacallit. Actually, let me pause the video here and I'll do something really fast. All right, we're back. Yeah, so I just set it up so my wife can have a conference with the door closed and the dogs are out here and all that stuff. Not picking on her. That's how she likes it. Okay, so I can talk a little bit louder, I suppose. A little bit more detail about Deep Rep Paladins. Notice I haven't covered gearing yet. I'll cover that very briefly. But I'll probably should do a separate video on gearing specifically. Right, so Deep Rep Paladins, basically, my bad, Reckoning Paladins come in like 2 different flavors. There's Holy Reckoning, and then there's a Heal Reckoning. That's a healing, that's the Eye for an Eye variant. And then there's Ret Reckoning, right? So 2 of these guys can heal. Oh, and then there's the Deep Prot version, which also is a both Heal Reckoning and the Deep Prot are modified versions of Holy Reckoning, basically. They all have heal in combat. They all have Reckoning. It's just one of them has heal in combat, Reckoning, and Eye for an Eye. It's the only one that can have all 3. And then Ret Reckoning doesn't have heal in combat capability. Ret Reckoning still absolutely terrifying. Nothing's changed since Classic World of Warcraft. She's literally just going to run at you with being very... Oh, that's one thing I forgot to mention about Deep Rep Paladin. With the Deep Rep Paladin, you need to gear them thick. Okay? All these Paladin builds should be geared thick. Okay? They are thick in their HP. They are thick in their fire resistance, and they are not neglecting their mana bar. Super, super important. That'll happen whether you like it or not, just by like starting to put bits of plus healing gear on your Paladin or spell power gear on your Paladin, just because that gear comes with like stamina, intellect, and then plus healing. Your HPS will start going up, so you'll be a thicker on the HPS front. You'll start feeling it, but you want to gear them nice and thick. It's super important that you be considerably durable. For a variety of reasons, right? Because the EVE Online rules are basically in full effect. DPS is super valuable to you to a point, and then it begins to fall off a fucking cliff, and just how much time you can sit on top of your enemy and beat the shit out of them becomes infinitely more valuable than how much a DPS you can increase. So, for example, yeah, I would say once you get the kill time down below a 20-second kill time of just sitting on top of the target, then HPS and subsequently time on target begins becoming more valuable. That's if you're not going for the second Hodge stun kill combo, which in my opinion should always be your backup plan. So your primary plan is to gear tough enough and durable enough that you can actually sit on top of the enemy for those 20 seconds and grind them into pulp. But your backup plan is, oh, by the way, I'm also durable enough to survive all your nonsense for a full fucking minute, and then to do this all over, to rinse and repeat this process, except this time it's front-loaded with a 7.5 second stun. Go fuck yourself, right? Good stuff. By the way, that also happens to line up with Divine Steed. You're like, how the hell did I catch this guy if I'm using Grenade and Hodge Stun offensively? Well, Divine Steed's on a 45-second cooldown. So, yep. The Reckoning Paladins, right. So, the Reckoning Paladins basically have 2 ways to try to kill somebody. Or multiple ways. They can engage targets in a mana war. That's perfectly fine. Not ideal if you're a Reckoning Paladin, but you can do it. They can look for high rolls on the Wreck Bomb, so they can engage in like a durability contest where they're putting Wreck Bomb after Wreck Bomb after Wreck Bomb into the enemy, waiting for the Wreck Bomb to high roll and then go all in on the Wreck Bomb. They can drag out a fight long enough if they have healing capability to, get to their second 6-second stun. And because you're a Reckoning Paladin now with a 6-second stun, good luck fucking living that. God help you. All versions of Reckoning Paladin can do that except for Ret Reckoning, but Ret Reckoning is still Ret Reckoning, so they're just going to press W at you and introduce you to the afterlife. Um, what else is there's not really all that much to really say about Reckoning. Um, a few things that I do find interesting is that you want what weapon to wear on you before you get. She's more interesting in her gearing than anything else, which is why I wanted to save her for last. So let's switch over to the gearing aspect here. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so there's a few weapons here that are very notable as far as gearing is concerned on your Reckoning Paladin specifically. And they are the Lava Dredger and Faithbringer currently. Okay? So, let's talk about the difference between these two weapons really fast. Let's just put on a Lava Dredger, and let's look at a Faithbringer. Yeah. Okay. So, drink of water here. Unlike a Holy Shock Paladin, unlike a Deep Ret Paladin, what two-handed weapon you're wearing while you're forced to heal yourself or while you're forced to press W towards the enemy is a big deal to a Reckoning Paladin, because Deep Ret Paladins can switch to whatever weapon whenever they want to, whenever they feel like it, with no loss to them whatsoever. Same thing with the Holy Shock Paladin. So when they're healing, they're using healing weapons, and when they're, offensing, they're using offensive weapons, and it's very simple for them. But for a Reckoning Paladin, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, because while you're at your weakest state, Paladins are at their weakest when they're forced to be immobile and healing themselves. While you're in your weakest possible state as a Reckoning Paladin, you are also highly encouraged to be wearing a weapon that has no plus healing on it whatsoever. You're being advised to have the biggest, slowest, most DPS centric beat stick that you possibly can, and the only opportunity you're going to get to switch out of that two-handed weapon into anything else whatsoever is after you deliver a wreck bomb into the enemy. Okay, this is where something like Lava Dredger and Faithbringer start coming in, and then later something as simple as a Grand Marshal's Demolisher starts coming into play here. So Lava Dredger is amazing because nobody else is going to want this weapon except Paladins, so it's going to be super easy to get. You can see it's very low DPS at 57 DPS on the weapon. That's not so great. But she is very thick on the stamina, very thick on the intellect. She's got 15 fire resist on her, and holy shit, she has a lot of plus healing at 84, right? She's a 3.2 speed weapon, which is reasonable weapon speed for a Reckoning Paladin, especially if your plan was to catch the enemy in a grenade stun, hit them once, and then Hodge stun them for 3 seconds. The Lava Dredger will give you an extra hit during that that little wombo combo. This is also a combo that Reckoning Paladins can try to kill targets in Season of Discovery. Specifically, you grenade stun them, then you just use the Hodge stun in like half duration, and often it's more than enough time with the two Hammer of Wraths that you can chuck into the enemy, and the eye for an eye procs and all that stupid stuff to delete people out of existence. This is probably what Reckoning is going to do, but the enemy could always PvP trinket that, right? And you're just like, okay, well, now I have to bubble and sit on you for a while and heal and try to reset this fight and live to the second Hodge stun where I kill you. Cool. But Lava Dredger is one of those weapons that if you're forced to use this for Reckoning purposes, if she's not the worst weapon in the game, and she might even be just absolutely amazing to just grind people into pulp. You'll even see Holy Shock Paladins will be using this weapon a lot, believe it or not. Absolutely disgusting and amazing. But Faithbringer, being a little mini Grand Marshal's Demolisher, let me throw up Grand Marshal's Demolisher so we can Grand Marshal's Demolisher so we can do a compare contrast here. Okay, cool. And now I want to find Faith. Okay, cool. All right. So as you can see here,
Grand Marshal's Demolisher, she's an AQ-40 equivalent weapon. She's 3.8 weapon speed. She's stamina and intellect, which is what you'd prefer over strength and stamina, which is what Faithbringer is. She's also quite thick on the stamina and the intellect, which is one of the major advantages to Lava Dredger. She actually has considerably more stamina than the Faithbringer does. But you can see the Grand Marshal's Demolisher also has a hell of a lot less plus healing. That'll probably be buffed up in the future because all the items are kind of buffed up in the future, believe it or not. So the Grand Marshal's Demolisher, it'll probably be something stupid like 55 spell damage and healing by the time they get done to it. But Faithbringer is amazing because she has 44 spell damage and healing on her, and she has 1% critical strike with melee and spell power. And those are stats that you don't mind being caught with your dick in your hand and forced to hardcast heals into yourself as a Reckoning Paladin. Lava Dredger has better stats for healing yourself as a Reckoning Paladin, but these are stats that you don't mind being caught with. And it probably more than makes up for the fact that, how do I put this? Lava Dredger is better defensively, but Faithbringer is better offensively. So if you can get away with healing yourself with a Faithbringer, it's better than healing yourself with a Lava Bringer. You'll notice that Faithbringer is also doing something stupid, like 13, let me think, 12, 7, 17 strength. So that's 2.5. Yeesh. She's doing something stupid like 11 plus 2.5 equals. Yeah, she's doing something stupid like 14 more DPS. I could be wrong about that. Let me check out the lava. This is important because you double this number. Lava in Season of Discovery. Lava Dredger. Okay, cool. Space. Faith. Check. All right, so 68.24 to 57. Yeah, okay. So it's almost 14 more DPS. In fact, it probably is exactly 14 more DPS. So Faithbringer, despite having less stamina on it, despite having not a lot of intellect on it, despite missing the fire resistance, and despite having effectively less plus healing on her than our Lava Dredger over here. That's the wrong Lava Dredger. That's the old Lava Dredger. Lava Dredger, Season of Discovery. And then Faith. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's not quite 14. It's doing something stupid like 13 more DPS. And in Season of Discovery, again, you basically have to double that. So it's doing more like 26 more DPS. One of these two weapons, unequivocally, one of these two weapons is going to be better for you as a Reckoning Paladin than the other. And it's going to be remarkably situational which one is better. So against this class, you want to use the Lava Dredger, but against this class, you want to use the Faithbringer. And that's so basically you're going to want both of these as a Reckoning Paladin. It's also highly advised that basically every Paladin in the game get both of these weapons. Even as a deep ret Paladin, it's either Faithbringer or Hand of Rag is the way to go for you. If you don't have if you don't have a Hand of Rag, you basically go Faithbringer. Faithbringer is awesome. But if you don't have Typhoon, the Lava Dredger is not the worst thing in the world for time on target. Just because that thicker mana bar gives you more mana back from like your Crusader Strikes. Thicker stamina, the fire resist is going to be really good. The plus healing is there for you. She's an amazing time on target weapon. The only thing that I'd even remotely consider taking over Lava Dredger for a time on target weapon, of course, is Typhoon. These days, though, believe it or not, Typhoon is an absolutely disgusting time on target weapon. Like, Jesus Christ, what is this thing? Her only issue is she's quite low stamina, at 10 stamina for a two-handed weapon. But that's where all the plus healing stuff comes in. Oh, crap. It's only a 1.7% drop off of Azure Ghost. That sucks balls. Okay, maybe she is a lot harder to get. Huh, interesting. Anyways, I'll end the video here. And Deus Fault, do not neglect. Let's put a Faithbringer on here. Actually, I put a Lava Dredger. Do not neglect being a thick boy in PvP. So you can see here, my gear, I've got like, a 6-piece of the ret set. I've got a 2-piece of the more healing centered set. All of this gear has plus healing gear on it. We've got a Dragon Blood Cape. Absolutely amazing. My rings are Fire Resist, Stamina, Intellect, Spell Damage, and Healing. Fire Resist, Spell Damage, and Healing as much as possible. We've got the Stamina, Fire Resist trinkets. Both of them. We don't want that. That's terrible. What are you doing here? I don't want that no more. That's right. They came out with a bunch of books recently. Not using Holy Shock. The Consecration. My build doesn't have Consecration. Blocking for more mana actually does have its uses. Honest to God, I probably just want Benediction. Is it Benediction? No. It's this. Where's the one that just increases my plus healing? Yeah, Flash of Light plus healing. Yeah, whatever. Just put this on. Or our boy. Where's our boy at? I haven't tested our boy in PvP, but if he's amazing, I'll use him. Really? 23? Basically our Squire. Our Squire might be amazing in PvP. I really don't know. I haven't done enough PvP to test Squire in PvP. But yeah, do not neglect being a thick boy on your mana bar. Do not neglect being thick boy on your plus healing. Do not neglect. You'll basically do just fine. You're going to need a lot of weapons. Every class is going to need a slow two-handed weapon. You're going to need a fast one-handed. You're going to need a slow two-hander. You're going to need a fast two-hander. You're going to need a defensive two-hander. You're going to need a slow one-hander and a fast one-hander. Like, life is just what it is. You're going to be doing a lot of weapon swapping. Getting into shields is not the worst thing in the world. I think I specifically went with this rune, the 2% mana back on block, because there were scenarios that I could envision, like versus a rogue or versus a hunter, where just being able to put on a shield with my readout and my Aegis rune going as a heal Reckoning Paladin, like 2% mana back every time I block is absolutely insane. And it fixes my one of the major weaknesses of Paladin in Season of Discovery, which is I can mana regenerate like a god if I'm in melee, but if I'm not in melee and I'm getting punched in the dick by certain classes, they can actually kind of sort of mana war me to death. Like, not very effectively, but they can. And then I put this Libram on and they just can't anymore. It's like GG's. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, I'll end the video here, and Day Assault, boys.